What if what we call love was never a space of peace, but always a battlefield in disguise? Nietzsche believed that between men and women there's no possible reconciliation, only a game of forces, attraction and repulsion, desire and domination. To love is also to want to possess, to want to shape the other, to risk oneself in the tension between two wills that never fully align. The promise of peace is an illusion created to comfort us, but reality shows that love thrives on conflict. Consider the relationships you've had or witnessed. The more passion, the more jealousy. The more surrender, the greater fear of loss. The more desire, the more silent power struggles. This contradiction is unavoidable. It's precisely what gives intensity, keeps the flame alive, reminds us that being alive means fighting. But then the inevitable question arises, does love exist only because there's war? Will men and women never find peace because peace, deep down, would kill desire? When you look at the first glances exchanged between a man and woman, something invisible happens. A silent dispute begins to form. It's not just instinctive attraction, but a hidden battle of who seduces and who gets seduced, who controls and who surrenders. Nietzsche said there's no neutrality in love, because love itself is already an act of power. To seduce is to dominate, to put the other in a state of vulnerability, to invade the territory of their will. The gaze of someone who awakens interest is never merely innocent. It carries intentions, expectations, desires that attempt to capture the other. When a man seeks to impress, when a woman adorns herself to attract attention, when someone chooses calculated words to enchant, all this is already strategy, already tactical movement in this invisible field. To love, in this sense, is always to put the other in a position of disarmament, then demand their surrender. If we look at daily life, we see this game clearly. A couple fighting over jealousy isn't just discussing fidelity, but territory, dominion, and recognition. When someone falls silent in a relationship, that silence often isn't peace, but a weapon. Silence as punishment, as blackmail, as a way to force the other to bend. The war of love isn't made only of screams and arguments. It also reveals itself in gentle gestures, small manipulation games, seduction strategies. Nietzsche saw seduction as deeply connected to the will to power. Each person seeks, consciously or unconsciously, to assert themselves over the other. Woman, with her mystery, provokes and bewilders. Man, with his conquest drive, tries to decipher and dominate. Both move like players who know the rules only by intuition, but can never stop playing. The promise of equality in romantic relationships is, in this context, utopian. Not because men and women don't deserve mutual respect, but because love, in its essence, isn't about equality. It's about imbalance. Who loves more suffers more. Who desires more puts themselves at disadvantage. Who yields more surrenders power. And curiously, even knowing this, we accept to play, because there's secret pleasure in being dominated, just as there's intense ecstasy in dominating. Imagine a couple in love at the beginning of their relationship. Everything seems perfect, vows, promises, endless caresses, but soon the first tensions arise. Who calls more? Who shows more? Who appears more vulnerable? And there begins the real game, the unstable balance of amorous power. There's no pure state of harmony. What exists is continuous movement of advances and retreats, force and fragility. Nietzsche alerts us. Let's not confuse this game with something perverse or sick. He's not saying love is a farce, but that love is struggle. And precisely because of this, it's vital. Without this movement, it becomes empty. Without intensity, without fire. Life doesn't want peace. It wants force, wants tension, wants creation from conflict. Love follows this same logic. It's an eternal battlefield where no side can win definitively, because total victory would also be the destruction of desire. The game of seduction and power is eternal because it's in this that men and women find the deepest meaning of relationship. Seduction keeps the flame alive, power gives desire its flavor, and struggle transforms each encounter into something unique. There's no peace here. There exists, yes, a war disguised as dance, a duel dressed as affection, a clash that instead of separating keeps both connected. In the end, perhaps we should accept that there was never intention of peace between men and women. What exists is a silent pact. We'll fight, we'll challenge each other, we'll hurt and heal simultaneously, because it's in this game that we feel the weight and beauty of life. To love is to enter war, and it's this war that gives meaning to love itself. Nietzsche affirmed that to love is to wage war. There's no love without conflict, because desire is never neutral. To desire is to want to possess, to want to absorb the other, to want to mold and transform. If love were only tenderness, it would quickly extinguish. What keeps it alive is constant tension between two forces that clash and attract. Just as fire needs oxygen to burn, love needs risk, threat, struggle to remain blazing. When we observe a relationship, it's impossible not to perceive battle marks hidden in every detail. Jealousy, for example, is an explicit way of declaring war. It's not just insecurity, but the attempt to delimit territory, to affirm, "You belong to me." Control of time, affections, glances is a warlike movement that many disguise under the name of care. Nietzsche saw in jealousy not a moral flaw, but an inevitable consequence of the will to power that permeates every romantic relationship. And it's not just about jealousy. Think of subtle manipulation of words. A person can use compliments to trap or criticism to weaken the other. One can yield on small points only to, at another moment, collect an emotional debt. Each gesture, each silence, each omission can be converted into a weapon. The war of love doesn't happen in open fields, but in the invisible trenches of daily life. Passion, in turn, is perhaps the most radical form of this war. It consumes, devours, demands. Who is passionate loses balance, surrenders without defense, dives into a state of extreme vulnerability. But this surrender isn't peace, it's risk. The passionate lives between ecstasy and anguish, because each demonstration of love is also a bet on the other's power over their life. Nietzsche saw in passion not just beauty, but danger. Passion transforms the lover into warrior and prisoner simultaneously. However, it's necessary to understand that this war isn't simply destructive. On the contrary, it's what gives meaning to love. The tension between dominating and being dominated, between possessing and escaping, creates vital movement that prevents the relationship from falling into monotony. The struggle between men and women isn't an accident. It's the condition for desire to continue existing. If there were only peace, if everything were predictable, if there were no risks, the flame would extinguish. Many dream of love as safe harbor, as rest. But Nietzsche would say, love isn't rest, it's storm. It's a rough sea where each wave can launch us into abyss or glory. It's the space where human beings experience their strength and fragility simultaneously. Who seeks only peace in love actually seeks the end of love, because they eliminate the element that gives it intensity. This conflict can be observed in the most common gestures. When someone insists on having the last word in an argument, they're not just defending a viewpoint, they're fighting for affirmation, recognition, momentary superiority. When someone decides to remain silent, it doesn't mean they've abandoned the battle, but chosen a different strategy, perhaps more silent and corrosive. Even forgiveness, so often seen as a gesture of peace, can be a way to impose power. I forgive you because I'm stronger than your failure. Nietzsche invites us to look at these dynamics without naivety. He doesn't condemn conflict, but reveals it as essence. Love is battlefield because in it, the deepest human will is at stake. To affirm oneself, to conquer, to win, even temporarily. The war of love isn't a sign of failure, but of vitality. Only those who have given up don't fight. And it's at this point that provocation becomes stronger. Do we seek peace in love because we can't bear the intensity of war? Does our idea of healthy relationship often hide the desire to eliminate precisely what gives life to love? Nietzsche might say that the search for romantic peace is, in truth, the search for domestication of desire. We want it to be predictable, docile, safe. But desire by nature is wild, unpredictable, dangerous. Deep down, the great question is this: are we prepared to accept that love is struggle? Are we willing to live in this war without hope of final victory, without expectation of eternal rest? Or do we prefer to believe in the illusion that someday we'll find perfect peace beside someone? Lover's battlefield doesn't invite us to give up, but to courage. Courage to recognize that to love is to risk oneself, expose oneself, enter war knowing there will never be definitive truce. This acceptance can free us from naivety and bring us closer to more real, honest human love. Nietzsche didn't write to comfort, but to awaken. And to awaken in this case is to perceive that peace between men and women may never come, because the love we seek doesn't feed on peace, but on eternal struggle between desire, power, and surrender. Nietzsche didn't see man and woman as beings destined for harmonious fusion, but as distinct forces that attract precisely because they're opposite. For him, masculine and feminine weren't just social roles, but different expressions of the will to power. Life, he said, sustains itself on tensions, contrasts, forces that don't cancel each other, but maintain themselves in eternal friction. If these forces neutralize themselves, the result would be death of intensity. Therefore, men and women don't find peace. Their nature is conflict, and it's this conflict that keeps love alive. Man, in his classic vision, seeks to conquer, create, expand. He launches himself into the world as warrior, inventor, affirmer of his will. Woman, on the other hand, appears as enigma, as mystery. She doesn't surrender completely, because she knows her power lies in veiling, hiding, disconcerting. Nietzsche saw woman not as inferior, but as guardian of a different force, one that destabilizes, provokes, never lets itself be completely deciphered. Thus, while man advances, woman resists. While he tries to dominate, she protects herself and simultaneously seduces. This contrast shouldn't be interpreted as inequality, but as essential difference. It's precisely because man and woman represent distinct poles that the relationship between them is marked by tension. There's no total fusion possible, because if there were, there would be no more game. They would be two equals cancelling each other out. What keeps them connected is exactly the fact that they never complete each other totally, that something always remains unreachable, something that escapes. If we think of everyday examples, this becomes visible. When a man believes he finally understood his partner, something changes, something escapes, something contradicts. She doesn't let herself be reduced to a simple scheme. Similarly, when a woman thinks she has totally dominated her partner, she soon realizes there are forces in him that escape her control, instincts that reveal themselves at unexpected moments. Love between man and woman, in this sense, is made of enigmas and surprises, advances and resistances, questions without definitive answers. Nietzsche invites us to see this opposition not as problem, but as vitality. Masculine and feminine aren't condemned to cancel each other. They're destined to provoke each other eternally. Man finds in the feminine the otherness that challenges him, that prevents him from closing himself off. Woman finds in masculine the force that destabilizes her, makes her rethink her own power strategies. There's no final synthesis. There exists the eternal return of difference, which keeps desire always alive. Many seek peace in relationships, trying to eliminate these differences, leveling everything in supposed perfect equality. But Nietzsche would say this attempt is a dangerous mistake. Life doesn't want equality, it wants difference. Tension is what generates movement, and movement is what keeps existence pulsing. If man and woman became identical in everything, desire would be lost. Attraction is born precisely from otherness, from recognizing that the other is strange, unreachable, mysterious. This perspective can be uncomfortable because it challenges our modern idealizations of romantic harmony. We want to believe it's possible to completely understand the other, that one day we'll reach peace in the perfect relationship. But Nietzsche reminds us that this expectation is illusory. Love is always incomplete, always unfinished, always crossed by the clash between forces, and it's this clash that gives love its depth. Perhaps that's why the greatest passion stories are also conflict stories. Romeo and Juliet, Tristan and Isolde, all myths and romantic narratives that cross centuries, speak not of peace, but of war between irreconcilable forces. The love that remains isn't the one that eliminates difference, but celebrates it, accepts living in tension, finds beauty in imbalance. Deep down, masculine and feminine aren't fixed categories, but opposite energies that dance around each other without ever merging. One needs the other to exist, but neither can surrender totally. Peace, if it came, would mean the end of the dance, the end of the game, the end of desire. Therefore, perhaps we should stop seeking total conciliation and learn to love conflict. To love is to accept that we'll never completely understand the other, that there will always be resistance, that there will always be difference. And it's precisely this difference that keeps alive the flame we so seek. The war between masculine and feminine isn't curse, but conditioned for love to exist as creative and transformative force. If there's something Nietzsche forces us to recognize, is that we not only suffer from the conflict between men and women, but also find pleasure in it. This is one of the most uncomfortable points, realizing that what we call pain in love is often also the source of its intensity. Without fights, without jealousy, without the risk of loss, love would become lukewarm, uninteresting, almost dead. Conflict, although it hurts, is also a secret spice that gives desire its strongest flavor. Just observe how the most overwhelming passions are born from tense situations. Desire increases when there are obstacles, when there's resistance, when we don't have everything guaranteed. Easy conquest may please initially, but soon becomes insipid. The game of approach and withdrawal, surrender and refusal, advances and retreats, keeps the heart in alert state, pulsing with more intensity. Temporary absence, unexpected silence, doubt about what the other feels, all this consumes us, but also attracts us. Pleasure isn't only in satisfaction, but also in restlessness. Nietzsche knew that human beings don't seek only comfort. Life wants intensity, wants movement, wants drama. That's why so many people, even in apparently secure relationships, end up creating unnecessary conflicts, a provocation, jealousy scene, unexpected demand. Unconsciously, we rekindle the flame of conflict because it's what keeps love alive. Boredom is more frightening than pain. Better an agitated heart than a numb one. In daily life, we see this happen in small situations. Couples who argue over trivial details, but after the argument, feel closer. It's as if the fight were a way to prove there's still something at stake, that passion still exists. Conflict functions as vitality test. If we still fight, it's because it still matters. When there are no more conflicts, perhaps what remains is just indifference. This pleasure of conflict shouldn't be confused with sadism or taste for suffering. It's not that we love pain itself, but we love what it produces. Intensity, presence, Importance. Jealousy hurts but also confirms that someone matters to us. Arguments tire but also reveal there's still desire to fight for that relationship. Love that doesn't face conflicts is anesthetized, fragile love, condemned to disappearance. Nietzsche would say that men and women, when confronting each other, aren't just hurting themselves, but also strengthening themselves. Combat is part of life's game. The will to power isn't pure destruction, but creation through struggle. Conflict makes us grow, reinvent, explore new ways to relate. It's like the clash between stones that, when striking each other, produce sparks. Without collision, there would be no light. Many believe love's ideal is absolute peace, but when this peace arrives, it often reveals itself sterile. Peaceful routine can kill desire faster than any argument. It's at this point that Nietzsche provokes us. Isn't the peace we seek actually disguised death of love? Do we insist on domesticating conflict only because we don't know how to live its intensity? The pleasure of conflict lies precisely in reminding us we're alive. To love is to expose oneself to the risk of losing, to accept instability, to live with permanent tension between proximity and distance. Fleeing this conflict is fleeing love itself. It's preferring the security of emptiness to life's tempest. When we look at history, we realize that the most intense relationships, those that marked eras, weren't peaceful relationships. They were relationships of torment, passion, excess. Love's memory isn't built on tranquil days, but on moments of great emotional impact. We love remembering both kisses and fights because both remind us of lived intensity. In the end, perhaps we need to admit that we don't actually want to eliminate conflict. We just want to manage it, make it bearable, transform it into fuel instead of poison. Conflict, when accepted, can be a source of growth and renewal. When denied, it transforms into frustration and resentment. The pleasure of conflict lies in taking us out of inertia. It forces us to position ourselves, choose, fight. And it's in this movement that love becomes full experience, not just empty routine. Men and women will never find peace because deep down, perhaps they don't want to. Conflict, however much it hurts, is also what gives meaning to desire. And without desire, there's no life. Nietzsche invites us to look with suspicion at what we call peace. Peace between men and women, so idealized in romantic or religious discourses, may be nothing more than a desire to flee from life, because to live is tension, is clash, is risk. And if peace were finally achieved in love, what would remain? A silence without intensity, a calm that suffocates, death disguised as harmony. Think of a relationship where there's never disagreement, where everything is predictable, where each gesture is calculated to avoid friction. Initially, this may sound like the dreamed ideal, absence of fights, absence of pain, but little by little, this calm transforms into boredom. Desire begins to disappear, the gaze no longer shines, bodies no longer seek each other with the same hunger. What seemed stability reveals itself as sterility. Peace in this context is the beginning of love's death. Nietzsche knew that life doesn't want rest. Life wants expansion, intensity, movement. Love that seeks only tranquility contradicts its own essence. It's not possible to deeply desire someone without facing the abysses this desire carries. Jealousy, uncertainty, possession, risk of loss, all this is inseparable part of romantic experience. Eliminating conflict is also eliminating passion. Many couples, in the name of peace, choose to remain silent before their dissatisfactions. They keep resentments, suffocate desires, repress confrontations. The result isn't harmony, but silent corrosion. Behind the peaceful facade, indifference grows. What could be faced as frank struggle transforms into apathy. And apathy is much more dangerous than war, because it kills slowly without leaving traces. Nietzsche saw love as a Dionysiac force, chaotic, overflowing, unpredictable. Wanting to transform it into something totally Apollonian, ordered and safe, is like wanting to imprison a storm inside a glass. It may even seem possible for a while, but sooner or later the glass breaks. Absolute peace is in practice unsustainable. And when we try to reach it, we end up destroying precisely what made us vibrate. Human experience shows this clearly. How many relationships end not from excess conflict, but from absence of it? How many couples separate not because they fought too much, but because they no longer fought? Constant silence, conformism, routine without intensity corrode more than occasional screams. It's preferable a love that oscillates between storms and calms than eternally flat love. Nietzsche would say the greater danger isn't war between sexes, but the desire to end it, because this desire, if realized, would mean the end of life's flame itself. Peace would be death, not salvation. To love is to risk oneself in disorder, not protect oneself from it. To love is to dive into conflict, not flee from it. This view may seem harsh, but it frees us from illusion. We no longer need to wait for a perfect relationship, free from friction. On the contrary, we can learn to love precisely the tensions, to accept they're part of romantic experience. When we understand that peace isn't possible and isn't desirable, we begin to value moments of conflict as essential part of love. In daily life, this can change everything. Instead of lamenting each argument, we can see in it a sign of vitality. Instead of fearing jealousy or insecurity, we can recognize them as inevitable expressions of desire. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or violence, but understanding that love isn't made of constant serenity. It's made of ups and downs, clashes and reconciliations, pains that also generate growth. Nietzsche doesn't call us to avoid conflict, but to cross it with courage. The true death of love happens when both no longer fight, when there's no more energy, when everything settles in emptiness, without sparks. The end isn't when we scream too much, but when we no longer have strength to scream. Therefore, perhaps we should reverse our search. Instead of dreaming of peace between men and women, we should learn to love the inevitable chaos that unites them. Because in this chaos lies life, and outside it only remains death disguised as calm. If we've come this far, it's no longer possible to pretend men and women will never find peace. But the question for Nietzsche isn't to lament this war, but embrace it. The mistake is believing conflict is a sign of failure, when actually it's life's own expression. The struggle between masculine and feminine isn't deviation, but the heart of desire, the engine that keeps relationships alive. Nietzsche always distrusted those who dream of absolute harmony. For him, the desire for total peace reveals a will to annihilation, to erase life's intensity. Peace is nothingness, is the silence of tombs. Conflict, however, is the affirmation that there's still energy, that there's still something to fight for. To love, in this sense, is to accept eternal war, to live knowing there will be no definitive reconciliation. Love sustains itself precisely in this back and forth. Approach and withdrawal, surrender and resistance, desire and repulsion. We want the other, but never have them entirely. We try to dominate, but are also dominated. This game has no end, and that's what makes it fascinating. If one day the war ended, desire would end with it. It's because there's tension that the heart accelerates, because there's risk that eyes shine. Embracing eternal war means changing how we relate to conflict. Instead of seeing it as enemy, seeing it as inevitable part of romantic experience. Arguments, jealousy, insecurity, all these elements can be lived not just as pains, but as reminders that passion still exists. Struggle shows that love still matters, that there's still something at stake. Nietzsche teaches us that eternal return, the idea that life repeats infinitely in its totality with joys and sufferings, is the greatest test of existence's affirmation. Ask yourself, if you had to live the same love, with the same conflicts, same pains, same reconciliations for all eternity, would you accept? If the answer is yes, then you've embraced eternal war. This doesn't mean romanticizing pain or accepting violence, but recognizing there's no love without struggle. The attempt to completely eliminate conflict generates only resentment or emptiness. To love is to be willing to face chaos, endure turbulence, live on the razor's edge. There are no guarantees, but perhaps that's exactly what makes love so intense. In daily life, this acceptance can transform relationships. When we understand war will never end, we stop seeking impossible peace. Instead, we begin to value moments of calm as respites within battle, not as definitive conquest. We recognize that each argument, however painful, is part of the greater dance that keeps the flame alive. Nietzsche believed only those who love fate, including its pains and contradictions, are truly free. Applied to love, this means only who accepts inevitable conflict can love fully. Who insists on seeking peace is always frustrated, always disappointed. But who embraces eternal war finds strength, intensity, and even joy in chaos. Men and women will never have peace, and this isn't tragedy, it's disguised blessing. Because it's this war that propels us, takes us from inertia, makes us want more. Life doesn't ask for perfect harmony, asks for intensity. Love, as life's expression, doesn't ask for rest, asks for struggle. In the end, to love is to choose to live the war, knowing there will never be truce. It's to look at the other and accept not only their lights, but also their shadows. It's to fight, lose, restart, reconcile, fall and rise. It's to live in a battlefield that, instead of destroying us, keeps us alive. Nietzsche didn't want us to flee conflict, but celebrate it, because it's in conflict that our strength, courage, capacity to affirm life, even facing pain, is revealed. To love is therefore an act of bravery, to accept eternal war and still want to fight once more. Throughout this journey, we've seen that between men and women there's no possible peace, and perhaps there never was. What we call love isn't rest, but storm. It isn't harmony, but conflict. Desire is born from risk, tension, struggle between forces that never completely reconcile. It's in this war that we find intensity, passion, life. Nietzsche showed us we shouldn't seek peace as salvation, because peace is only death disguised as calm. Love only remains alive while there's dispute, while there's mystery, while there's something unreachable in the other. Wanting to eliminate conflict is wanting to eliminate desire itself. But this realization isn't reason for pessimism. On the contrary, it's liberation. If we understand conflict is inevitable, we can stop seeking impossible ideal and begin living love with more courage and honesty. It's not about domesticating life, but embracing the chaos that sustains it. And now, I leave a question for you. What belief about love has imprisoned you most until today? The search for peace or fear of war? Which city are you watching from? Share in the comments below. If this touched you somehow, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for walking with us in this deep reflection. The community we're building here is proof that philosophy can transform how we love and live.